Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third series in the CVS Health LGBTQ plus health equity series. My name is Ali Capito. I am the Global Mental Health and Wellness Program Lead here at Accenture. Been with the company about 9 years, and I am really thrilled for you all to be with us today and to meet our panelists. We are talking about mental health equity for the LGBTQ plus community, really important topic for the world and especially for LGBTQ plus people right now post-pandemic. So I'd love to introduce you to our panelists quickly before we dive into some really rich content and discussion today. So I'm first going to hand it over to Tia to introduce herself, please.
Morning. My name is Tia Dole. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the Chief Clinical Operations Officer of the Trevor Project, which is the largest LGBTQ suicide prevention organization in the country, maybe world. I'm a clinical psychologist by training.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tia. Maddie, over to you.
Good morning. Maddie Edelman. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the founder or a founder and a former co-chair, current board member for GLSEN Phoenix. We're part of the larger GLSEN network in this country. I'm also proud to serve on our GLSEN National Board, and our mission is to create LGBTQ inclusive K-12 schools within the United States.
Wonderful. Thanks, Maddie. And Colin, let's go to you next, please.
Hi, good morning. My name is Colin Quinn. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Included Health, based here in New York. And Included Health, we are the first comprehensive care navigation, care coordination platform for the LGBTQ plus community. We partner with employers and health plans to offer our service for the benefit of LGBTQ plus employees, members, and families.
Thank you, Colin. And last but not least, Miss Deborah, over to you.
Good morning. My name is Deborah Fernandez-Turner. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm the Behavioral Health Medical Director for CVS Health Aetna. I'm a board-certified child, adolescent, adult psychiatrist.
Thank you so much. And my pronouns are she, her. Forgot to do that in the intro, but thank you all for being here and welcome. So a couple of ground rules before we dig into the topic. Just accepting that among the 5 of us on the phone today, 5 or 6 of us on the phone in the audience, we don't all know the answers. That's okay. Sometimes we're going to get things wrong. We're going to give each other some grace and space to discuss this topic openly and authentically. And we're just exploring health equity across the system, across the nation, across the world. So just make sure that we're speaking about equality and equity, being fair, being open-minded to the topic at hand. So I would just want to dig in with an overview of mental health. Here at Accenture and increasingly around the world, people are talking about mental health crisis. I view mental health as a spectrum. You're either healthy or unhealthy. You're either well or unwell. We can define mental health as a variety of things, but everybody has mental health. Some of us have mental health conditions. And so I want to make sure that we're being very clear that a diagnosed mental illness is something different than the everyday feeling of mental health. Many folks are being diagnosed with their first mental illness of their life now post-COVID. It's becoming increasingly aware that post-pandemic and even before the pandemic, we were all facing some form of anxiety, depression, PTSD. It's been on the rise for several years. And globally, we're seeing that 1 in 4 individuals are going to be affected by mental health in their lifetime. However, 1 in 2 of us are caregivers to someone who's affected by a mental health challenge. So it really is something that we all face. Mental health does not discriminate based on sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. We all know this. We've all faced certain challenges in our lives. And even more distressing is the fact that there is only one mental health professional in the world for every 100,000 employees that need one. So we're going to talk about how mental health, mental illness uniquely affects LGBTQ plus community, how we can advocate for health equity from our vantage point, either everyone on the phone today or everyone listening, and give you some practical tips for you to take back to your companies and advocate on behalf of others. So let's dig into that. I'm going to first come to you, Tia. I'd love to hear a bit from your vantage point about the history around mental health and the LGBTQ plus community in particular. What are you seeing at the Trevor Project, and what can we learn from history? So Tia, over to you.
Is a very broad question. That historical perspective. You know, I think what we're seeing now at the Trevor Project is a little bit different than what we saw 3 or 4 years ago. And I always tend to think about this as, you know, the last, I say 18, 20 months have been a unique time in American history or world history. And so to say, like, you know, the young people that have been reaching out to us and bringing up other topics that they haven't brought up before. For instance, you know, last summer's social justice uprising, people have been bringing up a lot of concerns about the world in a way that they haven't been. So how does that relate to mental health? Well, young people feel really anxious and scared about the sort of direction that our country is going in. And what that means is that they don't see a place for them in the world. And it kind of makes them feel hopeless and helpless because they see adults running the world into the ground. So to be perfectly frank. And so I think what we're seeing, and you know, now is that young people are really concerned that as they get older, there is no future for them. And a lot of young people reaching out to us can't picture what it's like being 25. A lot of people say things like, I don't imagine myself as an adult. What does that even look like? Where is there a job? Where is there a space? You know, I'm living in a rural environment. I have to leave here, leave my family, leave my church. And so, you know, I don't know if I'll go into the historical perspective, but right now, young people are feeling a lot of hopelessness, and that which leads to depression, anxiety, disengagement, and has a sort of cascading effect on their school and their friendships, and they end up feeling really isolated. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's disheartening to see. I follow the Trevor Project and your research every year, and mental health is adversely affecting the younger population. I think LGBTQ plus youth actually have the highest rates of suicide in the world today, especially in the US. So
well, and I'll add in, you know, one of our probably most stark statistic is that 40% of young people seriously consider suicide in the last 12 months. That's almost half. And then if you sort of add in trans or non-binary folks, they 50% of them seriously consider suicide. And it's not just like, oh, I wish. It's like how, when, where, and that's sort of terrifying to us because those are children who aren't telling anybody in their lives what's going on.
Absolutely. Maddie, in your work with GLSEN, how are you seeing the same thing? What are you seeing from your vantage point in terms of how we advocate for those youth individuals and make sure that they're getting the help they need?
Sure. I was thinking about the history of the criminalization of LGBTQ people and how we've been pathologized for so long. And only within my lifetime have some within the psychological and psychiatric fields depathologized us officially, but there's still that legacy, sometimes an attitudinal legacy, a policy legacy that sets many of us up for mental health concerns. So it's not surprising to me that it's not an even playing field. We don't all start in the same place or moment, so that when we have these exacerbating crises, whether it's a racial justice uprising, whether it's a pandemic, that LGBTQ people are already experiencing conditions which make our mental health conditions themselves at risk. So we see various forms of legal discrimination still today in 2021 for both young people and adults. And we know that LGBTQ people face higher levels of poverty, discrimination, and violence, especially trans women of color. We know that adults are facing discrimination, which affects our health within our families, our workplace, our neighborhoods. And for the work that we've done with GLSEN and the GLSEN National School Climate Survey, we're unfortunately seeing still a shameful level of anti-LGBTQ bias that goes really uninterrupted, not only from classmates or peers, but also from adults within the school. And as an educator myself, it's really difficult to talk about that adults are playing a part in reproducing this kind of pathology, this stigma that our LGBTQ young people have to experience. So according to our survey, over half of LGBTQ students report hearing anti-gay or homophobic remarks from their teachers or other school staff. And 67% hear negative remarks about gender expression from adults in the school. So for all that we're saying, young people need to get their acts together and figure out how to work together and be together in school or in a neighborhood, we as adults also have to take responsibility for interrupting this kind of unreflective, unconscious perhaps, but unpackaged anti-LGBTQ bias. So it's troubling what's going on in our schools that has direct effects on people's education and our well-being. So it's we have to connect the dots here. And that's why I'm really glad that we're convening this morning to talk about mental health equity among LGBTQ young people and adults. Because when young people aren't able to make it through the school day, when they're just surviving, that's not going to help them in terms of learning. You can imagine what it's like when a young person goes to school and they are concerned about how they're going to be treated by not only their classmates and their friends, but the person in front of the room, their teacher, their coach, the person who is serving them as a school counselor, or the person who's driving the bus they might take to school. When students are concerned about how they're going to be treated, it doesn't leave as much space as we need them to have to learn in school, which is their prime responsibility there. So you can tell, I think we can all bring lots and lots of insight to this. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just with the added division around some students, some parents choosing to keep their kids at home and do class via Zoom calls all day long, the isolation that folks are feeling, right? The isolation that they're away from their friends, they can't talk to trusted peers and people in their community that really understand them. Before we move into our next section, I just wanted to raise Tia, the legal landscape. I don't know if the audience knows this. I certainly wasn't aware that conversion therapy is still legal in 30 states and that there is, still anti-LGBTQ legislation. I think that a lot of people think, oh, marriage equality, we beat that, now everything's fine. No, it's not. There are still so many things that are anti-LGBTQ in this world. And I think that that makes it even harder to get access to medical care. So what are you seeing in terms of, when you mentioned the legal landscape, in terms of challenges facing this community?
Well, I'll say that the Trevor Project, we have an advocacy team, and one of their major goals is to end conversion efforts in the United States. I refuse to call it therapy as a psychologist. I won't get on board with it. But we are focusing on a state-by-state effort to, kind of do a multi-prong approach. A lot of conversion therapy efforts are not actually done by clinicians per se, but we want to definitely make sure that clinicians should not be able to do that. As part of that, if they do it, it will put their license in jeopardy, because we know that over half of young people who go through conversion therapy make a suicide attempt within 12 months. So it essentially causes suicidal thoughts, suicidal behaviors. There's a direct correlation. And so from our perspective, the legality of it is something that you have to go state by state. And I'll add, During 2021, sort of after the transition to our new administration, there are efforts by different states to actually take away the rights of trans children to participate in sports. And that's actually a lot more of what we hear, which is, well, now I don't know if I'll be able to use the bathroom that I want to use, or I want to be able to play on the volleyball team as a 12-year-old kid. And those anti-trans bills are something that we're also addressing with our advocacy team, because young people hear about them in real time. When I was a kid, there was no Twitter, obviously, there was no internet. But young people now just get a live feed of horrible things that adults are doing to prevent them from accessing just basic school functions. And that's what they're anxious about. And it tells them that whatever state they're in, that they're making these efforts, that the state doesn't want them there, that it's unsafe for them to come out, and that it increases their risk of suicide, because they're also holding themselves and their real identity in.
Yeah, it is a completely different world for children. I think social media could be blamed for so many incidents of anxiety and depression, and a rise in suicide attempts for sure, especially with all these challenges floating around with TikTok and YouTube and all kinds of things. It's a scary world. So let's shift gears a little bit. We've painted the picture for you. There's definitely a mental health crisis facing all of us, especially in the LGBTQ plus population. So how do we get to equity? Colin, I'd love to hear from you about the Included Health survey that you guys have done, and tell us a bit more about your research and what you're seeing in terms of how do we get to equal.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did in early 2020, and this was actually before the pandemic really took hold within the country, but what we did in early 2020 is we partnered with about 10 Fortune 100 companies. So we were really focused on looking at health equity for the LGBTQ plus community in the workplace. So looking at the employed, insured LGBTQ plus community, and really understanding what are the healthcare experiences, what are the gaps in care, what are the challenges in an ideal world, what would we like our healthcare to look like? So in order to get to this, we partnered with those 10 Fortune 100 companies and surveyed their Pride ERGs. And we got about 2,000 survey responses from it, so a pretty large data set. And really one of the first of its kind studies looking at the employed, insured LGBTQ plus community. I think we had some hypotheses going into it, thinking, hey, if it's an employee that's employed by a large Fortune 100 company, they have a good, stable job, healthcare benefits provided to them, and a little bit more of a support structure in place potentially, that we thought their health needs and disparities wouldn't be as severe as the broader LGBTQ plus community. But what we learned from the study and looking at the data is that the health outcomes and experiences were every bit as worse as the broader LGBTQ plus community. So finding out that, hey, they're really, it's really across the entire community, across geographies, and really challenges accessing and finding those providers that meet our needs. So digging a little bit into the data, and what we found is from our 2,000 survey respondents, about 40% of members are saying, yeah, I've been discriminated against in the healthcare setting. As a result of that discrimination, 35% are actively postponing or avoiding care today, which I think we can all agree is not a good thing. And this was once again before COVID. So we know that things were further exacerbated when we were not feeling so comfortable going into the doctor's office, right? And as a result of that lack of access and postponing and avoiding care, we know our community suffers from higher rates of anxiety and depression, where 43% of members said they've been diagnosed with anxiety and depression, compared to the US benchmark that we've been seeing is 17%. So a very much of a magnified approach or comparison there. And then we looked at it from a primary care setting as well, in connection to mental health clinicians too. Members were saying 45% of the time they struggle to find a primary care doctor that fit their needs or met, create a safe and welcoming environment for them. and 60% had difficulty finding a mental health clinician. So whenever you tie that 60% of us are having difficulty finding a mental health clinician, and 43 have been diagnosed with anxiety or depression, once again, just further exacerbating the issue to saying, hey, we've got to do a better job to connect members of our community to affirming and clinically competent providers who understand our needs and can provide that care and support that we're looking for. So based on those findings is really what drove us from an included health perspective to say, hey, there's got to be a better way to support our community. The best way in which we feel that we can do that is to be their care navigator and care coordinator, understand what they're looking for from a healthcare perspective, healthcare goals, healthcare journey, and get them connected to those right points of care. And continuing on thinking about from a workplace perspective, I thought it was really interesting what Maddie and Tia were talking about. Of course, from a youth perspective and what's happening in our school, it just breaks my heart to hear those things. But what Maddie was talking about, our adult population is part of the problem too. We're absolutely, unfortunately, seeing that in the workplace as well. There's been a couple studies that have recently been published with this notion of this idea of 1,000 daily touch points. So it's the small little touch points and interactions that we have throughout a day. And finding that members of the LGBTQ plus community, 75% of us experience at least one of those. And then at least 50% experience 10 or more. And we know that if we're experiencing those negative touch points from a workplace inclusivity perspective, we're 40% less productive and 13 times more likely to quit our job. So thinking about providing that safe and welcoming environment from a workplace perspective, retention of talent, this is a huge unmet need and a major focus point for employers right now as well.
Absolutely. Those microaggressions, as we call them, can absolutely take a toll, especially if you're not feeling at your best and you keep getting hit up with that negativity. It's just going to send everyone downward spiral. So completely agree. Interesting study. I want to hear from you, Deborah, in terms of what Colin just shared, but also just from your experience, what is the mind-body connection when it comes to physical and mental health? We've heard about all of the things around us impacting our mental health, but how does that manifest physically and mentally, especially for the LGBTQ plus community?
Absolutely. Well, we know very strongly that anyone undergoing any form of emotional stressor, we experience that not just in our thoughts, but really in our whole body. So I think everybody has experienced headaches during stressful times or a stomach ache or had trouble eating. That is really a small scale of what can happen when people feel threatened. When we feel threatened, we go into a fight or flight response, right? So think of we're confronted with a bear, right? And our heart beats fast, our stomach stops working, and we are ready to run or to fight. That's a healthy and normal response. We want that to happen. But when someone is going through persistent stressors, persistent traumas, a lot of what Maddie was describing, for example, bullying, abuse, microaggressions, when you walk into school and you aren't confident that your teachers and the other students are not going to hurt you, when you're worried that you're going to be physically harmed, there is no way that you can think, that you can focus. Your body and your brain both are in that sense of danger all the time. And that sense never shuts off. So it naturally does damage to both your body and your brain, not just in focusing, but also in things like chronic pain and in things like stomach issues. So, we regularly see individuals who go through chronic stress or chronic post-traumatic stress even, that really struggle both physically and in their mental health. So, it really is that your body is on overdrive. And so there's a lot of ramifications, both from a physical and mental health perspective. And you'll have a lot of individuals who, because of the pain and because of the challenges, you will see things like higher levels of substance use. And you'll see negative outcomes like withdrawing from school, having poor social connections. That sense of being unsafe has ramifications throughout your entire life.
Yeah, those are good points and good warning signs for all of us to look out for, especially if we are caregivers or coworkers in the workplace or in the schools. So definitely keep those in mind. If someone is in physical distress, it's often caused by a mental health condition and vice versa. So there is a symbiotic relationship there. Maddie, are there any other stressors that we need to be mindful of that are unique to the LGBTQ plus community? We've heard a lot about bullying, but are there any other unique things happening that you want to speak to?
Thanks so much. I'm thinking about the positive stressors as well as the negative ones. And some positive things that have happened just recently are we talked about marriage equality. That's still a recent win for many of us. We also have a Supreme Court decision that was just decided in the last year that made workplace discrimination based on gender identity and sexuality protected, recognized as protected as a form of sex-based discrimination. That Supreme Court decision then influenced the kinds of announcements, executive orders, agency practices going on in our federal government. So I want people to understand that there are victories, there are good things going on that can be positive stressors for us to inspire us to work collectively. But when we think about what I'm not calling it myself, but what is called minority stress, based on various forms of stigma that people experience. We know, for example, 2 out of 5 LGBTQ students of color experience racism and anti-LGBT bias in their schools from GLSEN's most recent studies of the erasure and resilience of LGBTQ students of color. So when we have stigma and various forms of stress from the negative point of view, we have direct effects on our health. So I want to pull the camera a bit and think about mental health equity, not only from an access to healthcare perspective, but also from the conditions in which we live on a perspective that grate on us, that wear us down in a holistic kind of way. Bodily, we're embodied as human beings, but also in some of our emotional and mental health. So the minority stress approach to thinking about health equity has us looking at these disparities, and I'll just name a few of them. One of which is that LGBTQ people belong to every single community that you can name, whether it's a racial ethnic community, religious, level of religiosity. We live in rural places that have historically been excluded from state resources, you name it. So let's just layer that on, that LGBTQ minority stress involves anti-LGBTQ bias or stigma, but it also involves levels of racism, poverty, and violence facing various communities in our country. So think about the accumulation across our lifespan of what researchers and public health specialists are calling adverse childhood experiences, things that create stress and trauma in our lives. Those kinds of experiences accumulate and create long-term impacts for LGBTQ people. So we experience high levels of rejection, of being housed. We have a disproportionate presence within our juvenile justice system because of the push out of our schools and out of our homes. When we do things that are criminalized, but they're just survival behaviors, we find young people who are LGBTQ, particularly young people of color, within our juvenile justice system, in our foster care system, in our jails and prisons. We have a lot of system-involved LGBTQ people in this country. So that's another layer for us to consider in terms of our mental health equity. When you add to it the disproportionate level of unemployment and underemployment within the LGBTQ community, we're talking about levels of financial, economic security stress that overtax our bodies and our minds. And we could talk, if you want, about the disproportionate impact of COVID on LGBTQ people, whether it's our unemployment in those industries that we work in more, that have been impacted more by COVID, whether it's in terms of our abilities to pay our rent or our mortgages, our fear and concern about being lacking a home, place to sleep at night in a secure way. Evictions are going to be affecting LGBTQ people disproportionately in this country. So there's lots and lots of layers here where there's an LGBTQ perspective on racial justice, on homelessness, on economic inequality that I think we need to take into account when we're thinking about the levels of mental health equity in our community as well.
Yeah, completely agree. The social determinants are so complex, and so many people have so many different identities that they align to, but it can cause even more barriers to even asking for help. So, Colin, what from your vantage point do companies like Included Health do to break down those barriers? I think we were talking before about the fact that it takes so much courage to even ask for help in the first place. So your first impression is often your only shot. So how is Included Health looking at breaking down the barriers to access to care?
Yeah, no, that's such a good point, and recognizing that first impression, that first interaction for so many in our community matters greatly and can really change the trajectory of our health and wellness for the rest of our lives. So placing a very strong and important emphasis on that first interaction, ensuring that it is a good provider, clinician to member patient match. So I think there's a lot that we can and need to do around the identification of a wide range and diversity of providers and clinicians who create both affirming and or who are both affirming and clinically competent. So what I mean by that is they are creating these safe and welcoming environments for our members to come into and be their true authentic self, seek out the care that they're looking for, but then also be clinically competent in the needs of our community, right? Really understand the health disparities, understand who we are as individuals and the types of care that we're looking for, so then we can have those good clinical outcomes as well. So I think it's making this information available to our community because unfortunately there is a lack of mental health clinicians. The statistic that you provided early on, there are so few for many of us, right? So being able to identify those and connect our members in a way that they're looking for. We know healthcare is personal beyond just finding somebody who is affirming and clinically competent. We all have our own provider or clinician preferences. So it could be racial and ethnic preferences. It could be regarding the provider that we're seeing, sexual orientation, gender identity, maybe in-person versus telehealth. So gathering all of this information, that way members and patients can select a provider that best fits their needs and they have that safe feeling stepping foot in the office or engaging in a virtual care way. So I would say those are a couple things in addition to identifying more providers or being able to educate more providers on the needs of our community. In 2018, Harvard, there was a panel discussion and a report that came out that, no surprise to any of us, but providers and clinicians are woefully underprepared for treating our community, right? I think it was up just about a couple years ago where less than 5 hours of entire medical school curriculum was dedicated to LGBTQ plus health needs and health disparities. So it's really incumbent upon the providers and clinicians themselves to continue to self-educate up just until our most recent classes from med school. We know as well that affordability of services are a major issue in thinking about that. So identifying providers who are accepting insurance or in a cost-effective way, working with health plans and insurance carriers to bring more providers in network and clinicians in network for members. I know we see it quite often with our member population where there might just not be a good quality option that fits their needs that is in network. So we work with the employer and the health plan to file what is called a network deficiency form to work for our member to bring that provider or clinician in network so then they can see that provider at a cost-effective way.
Can I jump in? Because there was something that both Colin and Madeline said that I thought was sort of interesting. Well, not sort of interesting. I was actually doing a grand rounds at a hospital. And when I was doing the grand rounds, a resident DM'd me while I was speaking and was like, because I was talking about intersectional identity, which is what Madeline was talking about, and how do we as providers sort of gain competency in this. And one of the things that they said is that they see a lot of sort of more seasoned clinicians engaging in microaggressions, and what did they do? So I was actually kind of curious if Colin or someone else, or I hope you don't mind me, Allie, asking this question, because I always think about, we tend to say, how do we gain competency in this? But I actually was kind of curious about what other panelists thought about what does it mean to gain competency, although I would say that competency is probably the lowest bar. And one of the things for our young people is that they'll actually go to see a therapist or a provider who identifies in the community, but they identify as trans or non-binary, and they're getting actually even bad treatment from people who identify as queer. And so just being in the community doesn't make you competent either. So I was just really curious about and Allie, I hope you don't mind. I was just kind of curious about what people thought about gaining competency, especially depending on what sort of field you're in and what does that look like, and how do sort of young people who we can learn a lot from, they see this, right? Because they're taught this in college, and then they kind of come in and they have no power. And so I don't know. I hope you don't mind me, Allie, asking the question, because I was really curious.
I love it. It speaks to a lot of in my opinion, the generational divide that we see in the LGBTQ plus community and the general broad population. I think that the majority of our workforce at Accenture, 90% are Gen Z. And, we don't know everything. We said at the beginning of this call today that we don't know all the answers. So I think seeking to understand from each other and seeking to learn with an open mind and a growth mindset is definitely something we're trying to advocate for across Accenture. But others, what are you seeing in your respective positions? Maddie or Deborah?
I was going to ask.
It really is an excellent question. Oh, go ahead, Maddie. I'm sorry.
No, I was saying I was looking forward to hearing from you, Deborah, about this in particular.
Absolutely. Well, it really is such an important question. And, is one that I think organizations have a responsibility, like CVS Health, especially large organizations have a responsibility to work with providers, to work with our employees and build that competency through training and through, so for example, CVS Health is offering allyship training. We're offering implicit bias training. It's not just being offered, it's being required. So everyone is doing this work together and the whole organization is moving forward together. So as large organizations can be that example and can begin to change the conversation, I'm hoping that will ripple even to smaller providers over time as that training and that knowledge grows. Also, we're seeing our professional organization, like my professional organizations, the American Psychiatric Association and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, within their training modules also, there is a great deal of effort and work being done for diversity and inclusion across the board. So I do think that there's an effort to raise the bar, like you were saying, and to go beyond just being basically competent, but to being inclusive and supportive and affirming.
I wanted to add, Deborah, to your perspective on this, that we're seeing at the school side that the call for professional development, the call for more inclusive learning is unfortunately in a reactive mode a lot of times. It's after something terrible happens or someone makes a mistake. We've had situations locally where a school with the best intentions outs a student as gay or as trans, perhaps to a family member, creating great forms of distress and vulnerability for that young person. And then on a good side, they know that they can get resources. So contact our GLSEN chapter. That's great. We'll go and do a training. But I want to advocate for a more proactive approach where people understand the need to continuously learn on the job. I'm a professor at a university, so I love learning. I'm really curious, and I understand also what it's like to be an adult and be frustrated or maybe embarrassed about not knowing, not understanding. So I just want to encourage everyone to say, oh, hey, it can be okay to do some homework. It can be okay to ask a question. It's okay not to know, but we do already understand what works. And so it does behoove schools, organizations, corporations to get out there and integrate this kind of learning before something terrible happens. I don't think any school organization wants to be in the headlines. We don't want to lose young people. We don't want to lose adults to suicide, but also just the terrible cost involved in having mental health distress in a chronic way, as Colin was saying, affects our performance in the workplace. It affects our learning in the school. It affects our relationships at home and in our communities. So let's be proactive. We certainly know what can be helpful, and there's lots of us out there who want to be partners in this learning.
Well, and I love, Maddie, just to add on, I always think about allyship, to Deborah's point, as like a verb rather than an adjective. And what I tend to tell folks is that if you're not uncomfortable, you're not doing enough. People have to take risks to be allies to LGBTQ folks or folks, but BIPOC folks, is that because LGBTQ folks are taking a risk by being their authentic selves every single day, you can do a little bit and step outside your box and feel uncomfortable and be like, hey, Karen, you just said something that I think is actually problematic, rather than always leaving it to BIPOC, LGBTQ folks to stand up for themselves. And, that risk starts to get more comfortable, right? It feels less scary each time you do it.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Just jumping in, I apologize, but I want to double and triple click on that point because it's so important. This idea of active allyship or whatever descriptor, when you use, I like using it as a verb because it says, hey, I'm doing something actively about this. Not passive allyship. It's not enough just saying, well, yes, I am supportive of my friend, family member, colleague, whomever it might be, but showing up and actively supporting, speaking out in support of the community and being there to support our member populations or our communities as well is so important, because I think a lot of individuals think being a good ally is just being supportive in your own thoughts and views, but it's so much more than that. It's actively doing it, it's actioning on it and using it in that sense of a verb.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll underline that as well and expand that to include clinicians, right? So if you want to be helpful to individuals in the LGBT community, you can't just say, I want to be helpful, I'm supportive. You really have to go in and do the work and do the training and understand the evidence-based practices for this community, because it really is unique. So we have to make sure that as clinicians, whether it be therapy, physician, psychiatry, primary care, pediatrician, doesn't matter. We all have to do the work and learn what is the evidence base out there.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And be mindful that, the burden's often on the LGBTQ plus community to educate others. And sometimes that can be a heavy burden, just as it is for the African American and Hispanic American community. It's not their job to educate you. It's your job to go and do the work and, find out what the challenges are so that you can be a better ally. So wholeheartedly agree. Great conversation. Thank you, Tia. I do want to talk a little bit about structural roles, the role that corporations can play. I know many of the audience on the call is probably from a corporation and asking what they can do. We've seen huge success with our parent networks here across Accenture in terms of helping provide that support. We have a power network, which is parents owning. It's a wonderful acronym and I'm forgetting it. Something about parents owning and empowering each other. But we've seen a lot of really good help through that, especially when we know mental health conditions manifest before the age of 14. Every mental health condition will actually be diagnosable by age of 14. Some go undiagnosed for many, many years, but clinically they've told us that by 14. So our parent network has really provided a good support for encouraging open, honest dialogue with LGBTQ plus children. And also just from an education ally standpoint, right? How do we help parents understand? You know, my child came to me and said, you know, Mommy, I want to wear dresses instead of, you know, dressing like a boy. What do I do now? And so they've been leaning on each other. So Deborah, from your vantage point at CVS Health, like, what have you seen in terms of parents having LGBTQ plus children come out to them, and how does it impact their work life and then also their mental health?
Well, you know, I actually love what you were saying about the support that your organization has for parents. And of course, CVS Health, we have similar what we call CRGs for our employees for support. So I think that's been really helpful for everyone, as well as our LGBT CRG, which we call Pride. So all of that has been really, I think, helpful for families. You know, corporations and health plans are really in a unique position because they're primary payers. And they pay for providers, they pay for services, and they are the employers for so many people in the country, right? So they're in a very unique position to increase national awareness and to move the needle of the entire culture, right? So each large organization or health plan, as they're creating that culture of inclusion and support, that really helps families, people who are in the LGBT community feel more supported. CVS Health has taken this responsibility as a primary goal, not just through our CRGs, but also, which honestly provide excellent programming support, but also we're in the process of implicit bias training. Our culture teams are working continuously to build a truly inclusive organization. And when you're mentioning parents who have children that come out, how helpful is it when they know that their boss has their pronouns at the bottom of their email? It just gives you that sense of it's going to be okay. And when you see other individuals who are of transgender experience in leadership, you can take a breath and say, my child is going to be okay. You know, representation really matters in organizations and within communities. So as large organizations and corporations help move that needle, not just in putting down your pronouns, but also in ensuring that we have a diverse leadership, again, that moves things forward and allows everyone, whether it be parent or employee, to take a breath and say, okay, this is a safe place and my family is going to be okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that perspective, Deborah. I know it's so complex, and I think the more we talk about mental health, the easier it is on all of us. It's talking about it just makes it destigmatized that much more. So I know we could talk all day long, but I want to move to solutions, and I'd love to hear from each of the panelists in your view. Kind of what is the path forward? How do we tackle this? And what is the one thing you recommend for the audience to take away today? What is the one thing we can do to champion health equity, mental health equity for the LGBTQ plus community? So I'm going to start with you, Colin, but what's your one solution?
It's hard to narrow it down just to one because I feel like there are so many, but hopefully with each of us giving our one, we'll cover quite a bit here. I think if I had my wish, it would be this idea of being an active ally. I'm so happy that Pia brought that up because it is such an important aspect here. Being actively involved in your workforce, in your school, in for your students or for your children, your family and friends, being involved in their lives and really being there as an active ally to support them and understanding the challenges that many of us experience on a daily basis. So I think that's a major aspect of it. But as part of being that active ally, I want individuals to really walk away from this with this idea of a one size fits all approach to healthcare does not work and is not working. I think that's a term and a phrase that many of us have been using over the past year and a year to 2 years, especially from 2020, year of cultural awakening, recognizing that, hey, this one size fits all approach is not working. It's not about equal, it's about equity. And in order to get our underserved member populations back to a level playing field, we sometimes have to do more to support our member populations. So being really thoughtful and taking a tailored approach. So in order to be able to understand what is that tailored approach, spending some time talking to your ERGs if it's from a workplace perspective. So your or your employee resource groups. It's a concentrated captive audience of individuals coming together within your workplace. If you're a benefits teammate on the call today, I would highly encourage you in your active ally role to participate in all of your ERGs, have active conversations with them, understand what are some of the needs and challenges that they as a group and membership are experiencing from a workplace perspective, from a health equity perspective. What can you do as a benefits leader to offer additional benefits, maybe restructure some benefits, being thoughtful about inclusive workplace policies and environments, which also includes inclusive benefits as well.
Thank you, Colin. Appreciate that. Maddie, let's get your thoughts on from your vantage point. What's the one solution our audience should take away today?
Sure, you asked for one, I know you're going to get more. So I'm a lurker on social media, and I recently saw this meme from the Utah Navajo health system. And their hashtag is We Are Navajo. And I'm thinking about how mental health equity, we've been focusing some of our comments on suicidality and completed suicides. And the meme says something like what people think suicide prevention is, and there's a hotline, and we certainly need hotlines. We need them 24/7. We need them staffed by professionals. We need them staffed by peers. But thinking about the social determinants of health, the meme goes on to say what suicide prevention can be or actually is are things like food security, affordable housing, destigmatizing mental health care, parenting skills, family relationship programs, family acceptance of individuals who identify as LGBTQIA+2 spirit. So thinking about those structural changes we can make as members of corporations, as members of organizations, or as members of our just neighborhoods and communities. I'll say the one thing that we can do is listen to young people, follow the students. They're the ones that I've been learning from for the last 20 years doing this work, who are telling us about the need to make changes in our policies and practices. So we can learn from our systematic research, we can learn from each other as adults, but we can also listen and learn from young people who are telling us what they need in our families and in our schools. And I'll just close by saying that we can also urge our elected officials to support the Equality Act, which would amend the 1964 Civil Rights Act to include discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, among other protected categories, so that we can all feel secure across the country and really end this patchwork of protection that we currently live under.
Thank you, Maddie. Couldn't agree more. Increasing the protective factors and reducing the things that are causing the stress that lead to mental health is absolutely critical. Thank you for that. Tia, over to you.
I'm going to think of this as twofold because I'm coming from the crisis world, right? And so we know that one accepting adult decreases a young LGBTQ youth's risk of suicide by 40%. Huge. right? So one adult saying, it's okay. I love you no matter what, or you're a great person. Any of those, teachers, nurses, anybody in that person's life saying that to a young person decreases their suicide risk. So that's one thing. Be a kind person. Your role as an adult is to be shepherd young people through life, and it would be helpful if you were to jerk at it about it. The other part about I would suggest is we say this thing in New York City on the train: if you see something, say something. One thing is that a lot of parents, as always, they see it coming, the crisis coming, and they talk themselves out of it. They say, well, that we just switched schools, or teenagers are moody, or it's normal for them to withdraw like that. If you are feeling something is off, please get your child help and don't wait, because it could be the difference between life and death. So don't ignore your instincts.
Completely agree. I love that phrase. If you see something, say something. We've got to get more confident about speaking up and saying something for sure. Deborah, over to you. What, from your vantage point, what's the one recommendation you want to leave, either from a corporate standpoint or otherwise?
Actually, I'm going to suggest some really simple, low-hanging fruit that everyone can do right now. And first of all, open up your email, put your pronouns on the bottom of your signature. It matters. When you start a meeting, start every single meeting with introductions with pronouns. It matters, okay? When you're addressing a group, make sure you're using gender-neutral terms, everyone and friends, instead of ladies and gentlemen. And when you're meeting somebody, make sure you're using, again, gender-neutral terms. How's your spouse? How's your partner? Rather than how's your husband? How's your wife? Or how's your, do you have children, as opposed to do you have a son or daughter? Those small shifts make a difference in letting someone know that they're safe where they are. And they're so simple to do. I'll add in, from the corporate perspective, again, I'm just going to reiterate, representation matters. So making sure to elevate the voices of individuals in this community within your corporation makes a real big impact and support for everyone in your organization to know that it's okay.
That's fantastic. Thank you all. I think this has been an incredible discussion today. I know each of you has such incredible, rich expertise. I think everyone on the call, we hope that you have learned something new today. We hope that you're going to take some action away from this call. Thank you to all of our speakers, Maddie, Tia, Deborah, and Colin. Appreciate you. There will be a toolkit after today's call in the link, and look forward to seeing you on the next session in our series. Thanks, everyone.